Good morning, everyone. My name is Dongmin Lee. I'm currently serving as associate professor at Dankook University, specializing in Chinese security studies and international relations of East Asia. A fundamental question that we are going to ponder upon today is an issue related to Taiwan Strait, particularly in the era of rising uncertainty due to strategic US-China competitions. And in order to tackle these fundamental questions, we invited two excellent panelists. Can you further introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dean Domanhit. I'm a president of StatBase. It's an institute for strategic international studies. We are focused on other areas, but key to our research concerns are defense and security within the Indo-Pacific region.
And I'm Maya Nawans. I'm the Senior Fellow for Chinese Security and Defense Policy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. In my role in the IISS, I focus on Chinese military modernization, as well as traditional and non-traditional power projection capabilities of China. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let me begin our conversation by asking some of this intrinsic question, and we go from there. First question that I have is this. Are we facing imminent change to the status quo in Taiwan Strait, and why would you think so?
I can maybe go first.
Yeah.
I think we have seen a change in the previous status quo in the Taiwan Strait. It's clear that in terms of at least military activity, incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, there's been a heightened sense of activity and tempo of activity around Taiwan by the PLA in terms of aerial incursions, but also PLA Navy activity around Taiwan. And all of this, of course, I think is stemming from a new normal of PLA activity after former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which greatly displeased Beijing, but also gave it an opportunity to perhaps increase different ways of pressure on Taiwan to signal its discontent.
I agree with Maya, but I'll add, moving beyond that activities of the PLA is, I think what we are seeing right now also is this collective desire to deter any change of the status quo. When you look at different trilaterals, different initiatives coming from US, its allies, its partners, that could deter that, from the South Korea, Japan, US trilateral, the Philippines and the US alliance getting stronger, and even broadening to trilaterals with Australia, even with Japan. So that kind of actions, I think, will prevent that status quo from really changing, and hopefully it does.
Okay, great. What do you think that all of a sudden in perhaps past couple months and also past year or so, including United States and regional countries here in East Asia, begin to focus more on Taiwan Strait?
Critical, I think, to global trade, critical to really maintaining a rules-based order within the region, within the Indo-Pacific, is to ensure that status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Even from a Filipino point of view, our national security strategy just came out a few months back, even defined the Taiwan Strait as a major concern. And a study that we did, our institute, authored by a retired Rear Admiral of the Navy, looking at our archipelagic maritime security strategy. Any changes in the status quo will have effect in the Philippines, especially the northern part of the Philippines, the northern islands, which is quite near from Taiwan. So I think it has become a concern by countries within the region. Anything that happens in the Taiwan Strait will affect South China Sea, East South China Sea. So the best is to really put focus on it, ensure that we maintain the status quo.
Would you agree?
I completely agree, but I wanted to add maybe a European perspective to this as well, because we now see in Europe greater discussions in the open about a potential concern about a potential conflict across the Taiwan Strait, concern about the future of Taiwan's democracy, I think this predates the heightened military activity. I think there's been a greater awareness over time of different ways of PRC pressure against Taiwan, whether it be economic coercion, whether it be disinformation or cyber attacks. These are all areas that Europe, of course, is also trying to deepen itself in, trying to understand better. So here, trying to understand what is happening in Taiwan is also beneficial to Europe's own moment of learning about the challenges that it faces from China, potentially. The other thing that I wanted to say, of course, is fully agree that there's this prosperity angle to the question. For Europe, I think during COVID in particular, Taiwan's importance in the semiconductor supply chain became incredibly clear. And not taking away from the importance of Taiwan as a like-minded partner, certainly Taiwan's importance and value within global supply chains was a real driver as well to look closer at the potential risks of a Taiwan conflict and what impact that would have economically. And we've seen various statistics by research institutes like the Rhodium Group come out about what the global impact of just 1 year of a blockade without any further actions would cost. And the cost is immense, nearly $2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken.
So definitely the changes with status quo in Taiwan Strait is it's not just security related issues beyond that, and including economic security as well. In fact, historian named Neil Ferguson once argued that if there's a major status quo change in Taiwan Strait, there will be the changes of so-called the global order, right? I mean, liberal international order that we all inherited after World War II. So I think what that is part of one of the reasons why not just regional countries, both but also in countries in Europe may also pay attention to this.
Yes.
This
I think when you look at this international order that we have, security, economic order, it will have drastic effects really when we change the status quo in Taiwan, because part of that is the digital order. And Taiwan plays an important role, as mentioned earlier by Mai. And it's critical that we protect that kind of order from an aggressive, coercive northern neighbor, not only of Taiwan, but also of Southeast Asian countries, and also the rest of the world who passes through those Taiwan Straits.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add also onto Dindo's answer, which I fully agree with, that from a European perspective, the rules-based international order is currently being challenged in Europe as well by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And from a European perspective, although the Ukraine situation and Taiwan are not equal and are not the same, there's certainly a parallel being drawn here in terms of the relationship, the deepening relationship between Russia and China. And so I think what has happened is that there is now in the European mind a linking of the Indo-Pacific theater and the European theater, and that changes in the rules-based international order in one region will significantly impact the rules-based international order in the other region. There's an indivisibility between these two theaters now. And so for Europe, it is important that the status quo be maintained across the Taiwan Strait, and of course also that stability in the Indo-Pacific is maintained as well.
So they're both intertwined, both the case in Ukraine and also Taiwan Strait
Absolutely.
issues. Yeah. Okay, great. Then let me pursue with the second question. Okay, which major event will foreseeably influence further development in the Taiwan Strait, in your opinion?
I think there's a couple of things that are coming up on the horizon that might have an impact. Taiwan, importantly, is having elections, presidential elections, and the outcome of that in January next year, I think will be important for how Taiwan continues to decide its future. And secondly, of course, also how the PRC might respond. Secondly, of course, there's the United States presidential elections, which I think everybody is watching really closely, with some concern about who might potentially win and what that means for United States commitments internationally, or whether instead we'll see a United States that's more focused on America first. And similarly in Europe, we have a number of political developments and elections upcoming, and serious challenges at home that need focus and attention and resolving, not least the war in Ukraine, but also a cost of living crisis in countries like the UK. So there is, I think, potential that the level of attention might shift in a number of different countries. That we'll have to wait and see the outcome of.
It's true that, in this liberal order that we speak of, we all live in a democracy. Taiwan is a good example of how democratic, peaceful change can happen. So it can alter policies. So I agree, and we have to watch the policies of government moving forward after the elections. In 2019, I remember really we were watching that because in the Philippines we had our own challenges. We wanted really stronger stance against China, and I was personally looking at the election results and the DPP winning it in January, and I saw that as a good sign. So we'll see where it goes, and consistency also of different nations. Because in this region, in the Pacific, South China Sea, East South China Sea, people like me, countries like ours, we live in this region. This will not alter our lives in the next few years. Whatever election results happen, we need to deal with it. So you just hope that those who support a rules-based order in a broader Indo-Pacific can continue to be consistent in their policies. And at the end of the day, we've been saying that in our country, when we fought for our own sovereignty in our seas, we kept on saying we have to prevent China from turning South China Sea into their own lake. And we need a collective effort really to prevent that from happening. Though it has been late, it's a catch up for people in the region, but still we want that consistency. Hopefully elections will even strengthen the position of countries beyond the region, in the broader Indo-Pacific, to collectively deter China from really becoming more powerful and turning this region as under their hegemonic control.
I suppose the other thing to consider is not just the policy decisions of governments, but also a potential accident or misunderstanding or clash. And certainly from a European perspective, that's what we worry about a lot when we think about the South China Sea or heightened activity around Taiwan. Is that similarly a concern for countries in the region like the Philippines?
Especially in the Philippines, because that possible accidents continue to happen. Just yesterday, when the government was trying to resupply our naval outpost, our Coast Guard were being harassed by so-called Chinese Coast Guards and militia vessels. But that's where we should collectively, again, countries that believe on a rules-based international order, should work together, ensure that South China Sea, East South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait continues to be free. In terms of movements of goods, movement of navigation, and prevent this aggressive. We have called these actions by China as coercive, and this continuing aggression that they normally do to our fishing folks in the Philippines might lead to some accidents in the future. 2 days ago, there was an accident, maritime accident. So the fear was it could have been a ship from China. At least it was a commercial vessel. It was really an accident. But if not, that could have, for a few hours, it caused some situation while we were having joint naval exercises with other countries. So we would say, is it related? So you fear that, but it turned out it's a commercial vessel, that it was purely an accident, where some fishing vessels we lost some lives from our fishermen.
Yeah, I think the sense that I get is that nobody actually wants a conflict.
Yes.
So that is a positive, that all sides are seeking to moderate their behavior, or at least signal as clearly as possible. But as you said, there's a lot of activity, and so that could lead to a conflict. And at the end of the day, if there aren't channels of communication, if there aren't crisis resolution mechanisms in place, that suddenly becomes quite worrying.
Yes.
So I definitely had to concur with both of you. The point that for example, the military modernization program of China goes beyond perhaps in the Taiwan Strait and maybe going to South China Sea and maybe in the Western Pacific area. Yeah. Would you agree on that point?
I would agree. I think Dindo is the expert on the Philippine experience here of what the Philippines faces in terms of PRC military assertiveness. I would certainly say that for the time being, the sense that I have is that the prioritization for the PLA is really in the Indo-Pacific, primarily within the first island chain, moving towards the second island chain. I don't think that the PLA at the moment has the capability for sustained or permanent large-scale deployments further afield, although we do see PLA activity around the world. But there is a political prioritization at play here that I think matters.
Building on that is when you look at the first island chain, to connect to the second island chain is what we call the Luzon Strait, or the Bashi Channel, which is the northern part of our archipelago, which is also quite near to Taiwan. So how it's interconnected. And especially a few weeks back when China came out with their official 10-dash line. And you see, suddenly, it's something that has been negated by our 2016 arbitral ruling that said 9-dash line does not accept. To continue raising that and making it official really brings to mind really how they will continue to be assertive. And the best way to stand up against this assertion is really a collective deterrence among like-minded countries that believe on a rules-based international order.
But not just in military terms, right?
No,
because this is part of, in essence, lawfare in terms of using legal tools to push a narrative, to push a certain claim, as we've seen in the South China Sea before, and we've seen that through a succession of domestic laws, national laws that have been legislated and passed in China in the last few years, whether it's the Coast Guard law or publishing the 10-dash line map. I think here we need to think more about how hard power and other tools of diplomacy can work together in a better way across like-minded countries in a coordinated fashion. Because that's the only way that I think this is going to be comprehensive.
When you look at what the Philippines did with regards to using international law, we always saw ourselves as a small player, and we saw international law as the great equalizer. So even within our own government, I remember in 2013, there was fear that who are we to challenge China? So we really waited in 2016 when it came out, and we won 15 out of 16 arguments that we raised. And we saw the support coming from countries. That's why when we speak of like-minded countries, we know we have a list of that, because they even it goes against their economic relations with China. They stood up because that's what we need in this world, and that's what to ensure peace, stability, prosperity, especially in this region. We need that kind of belief that international law works, that we live in this rules-based order that protects nation's interests based on what is prescribed by international law that we have agreed on.
Yeah, I do have a further specific question for you. The strengthening of so-called ASEAN centrality, does it really help?
I have my negative opinion about that, because ASEAN centrality was the reason why you filed the case. Because ASEAN did not like to make a stand, and even prevented the foreign minister of the Philippines from speaking and raising this issue, 2012, if I remember that. That's why what the Philippines did, we broadened. We saw ASEAN not being an effective mechanism on this issue. They're stuck still with their code of conduct discussions. So we brought it to a broader support base, really reaching out to other countries that we believe values, that share our values. And then we built unofficially a coalition around that. Quite sad that when we won the case, there was a government that was appeasing China, an administration in the Philippines that was appeasing China. So even the countries that the coalition that we built on kept quiet, because I remember them, diplomats, visitors telling me from different foreign affairs offices, we cannot stand up for the Philippines because your government is not standing up for you. But our government was appeasing China, was saying, see, no, but we are all alone. So the first thing we did was really, instead of relying on ASEAN, we made it a public issue in the Philippines. That's why going into the election year of 2022, 89% of Filipinos want the next president to be assertive.
Sure.
And it basically, and we got surprised that all candidates shifted their foreign policy direction towards that. So, and the international community jumped into it by showing their support right after the election happened, when there was a proclaimed winner already, saying we're here to be with you, to be assertive with you, and not in only words. And we have seen that for a year, because it's been a year we have a new government. So that kind of activity, you have to find ways to go beyond what's the limits prescribed by your own, in this case, the ASEAN region. That's why the ASEAN, we're happy with their Indo-Pacific position. That's good enough, check, but it does not serve the interest of the Philippines alone.
Right. I mean, those 10 countries in ASEAN members has their own respective, perspective on,
Yes.
on China and their policy towards
Especially
the
when your
regions.
economy is tied up to China.
Right.
You become a spokesperson.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Which major event will foreseeably influence a further development in the Taiwan Strait? I mean, that we that was the question that we pondered upon. But if it occurs, how will further escalations affect different countries?
In the Philippines, as I've said earlier, our own national security strategy defines this as a major concern, because there is that belief that our northern islands, which is part of the Luzon Strait or Bashi Channel, could even be taken over by China, because they can even launch their attack from that area, the southern attack, if there will be a southern attack to Taiwan. So that's why one of the first, and we published this in our institute last year, and we were happy with the decision of our government to reintroduce a defense agreement signed in 2014 and expand it to those areas. So me personally, I believe it will not happen because of the stronger relationship now between Korea, Japan, and the US, but also the enhanced defense cooperation agreement of the Philippines being moved to the northern side of the Philippines. It becomes a strong deterrent, because that's what we fear. And we're hoping that it will not happen, because it will really provide some security risk for the Philippines and the northern side. But also, at the end of the day, I go back, it's economic also in nature. That kind of development will affect the movements of trade, the movements of commerce from Japan, Korea, and even from countries in Europe, I think Australia, all these areas, in the Philippines also. So we have to ensure that the status quo remains.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this goes beyond economically. Of course, there will be a global impact that will be very far-reaching and felt by everybody. But in terms of the physical impact of a military contingency, if it does become a kinetic one, I think one thing that's being discussed more and more is not just how countries like the Philippines will be affected, of course Taiwan very much so, but how countries like Japan and South Korea might also be drawn into this conflict. and whether or not they will suffer preemptive strikes to try and deter them from participating or coming to Taiwan's aid through the targeting of U.S. assets in those countries. Similarly, there's a concern about how potentially in the event of a Taiwan conflict, the DPRK might play a spoiler role. So there's a bigger Korean Peninsula question that needs to be kept in mind. Further afield, there are other actors. In Europe, we certainly are concerned about, depending on what the situation is with Russia, if this ever does occur across the Taiwan Strait, how Russia might potentially play a spoiler role or a distracting role for Europe in the Euro-Atlantic region. This isn't just about the kinetic impact or the impact of a kinetic conflict in the region, in the immediate neighborhood, but also follow-on impacts, domino impacts in other regions around the world. And lastly, maybe we don't talk about this much, there'll be an impact and a cost on China as well to do this. That needs to be kept in mind, not just economically, because the economy will suffer, of course, as well, not just our economies, but China's as well. And certainly, I think thinking about the capabilities that Taiwan is building, this will be costly for the PRC to conduct.
I do have to concur with both of you. In fact, now China has a huge, it's middle class, so it is really difficult for the top, not only military officer, but senior, the leadership to make aggressive move. But speaking of that, now after the Nancy Pelosi's visit in Taiwan last year, so-called this channel of communication between the United States and China basically disappeared. Do you think that it will be possible for it to reconnect this channel of communications and perhaps build some kind of this crisis management mechanism to prevent or to kinetic measures? Well, yeah.
It's an excellent question and a very important one. From my understanding, the U.S. and China do communicate, and they communicate through various different channels. There is, of course, less high-level military-to-military communication, but I think there is some working-level communication that is ongoing. There is, of course, economic channels that can be used, different discussion channels that could be used as well between the U.S. and China. So it's not that all communication has been cut. I completely agree that after they revived the channels of communication that were temporarily suspended after former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. That could be useful. In terms of a crisis communication channel or a formal mechanism, I think that's quite difficult because China and the U.S. come at this from a very different philosophical perspective. From the U.S.'s perspective, you need to implement a channel of crisis communication at a time when relations are not positive in order to prevent those relations from becoming even worse and deteriorating. From a Chinese perspective, that's impossible. You negotiate these channels and you implement these channels when relations are good, because otherwise there's no basis of trust to implement these channels on. And I think what we've heard from Chinese experts is that from a Chinese perspective, implementing those types of crisis communication mechanisms at this point in time would simply just allow the United States to, on the one hand, say, well, we've got this channel of communication, we're talking to each other, but on the other hand, we're just going to continue with the policies that we want to pursue. So they're not content with that formulation as they perceive it. So I think we're coming at fundamentally different perspectives, and whether we can reconcile that, I think, is going to be quite challenging.
Okay.
Yep. There is an open communication, I think, I agree. We've seen visits happen, and of course, possible maybe meeting during APEC, of course, economic related, but it creates that opportunity to communicate. But do you really trust China in terms of this? That's what my question was, because they will use that as a mechanism to serve their own interest. Our joke in the Philippines, because we had that so-called crisis communication, but nobody answers in the other line because they have their own plan already. That happened in Scarborough Shoal in the Philippines. Nobody was answering. It happened again last January, when right after the visit of our president to China, talking about, we will revive this open communication line. Chinese militia started harassing fisher folks. Government was calling. Nobody was answering again. So internally, we always see it, again, not from theory, but from actual, that if they have their own interest, they will not take that call. That means they have plans already. So for me, it's always good to look at it that China will not do anything if they see a collective effort among like-minded countries, that they fear that they will not be successful in Taiwan if they attempt. So that's we need to project that collectively, I think.
So your point on having this collective effort, defending democracies throughout the world, and also in Taiwan Strait, I think that's most important.
Yes, because it defines the world differently, and it also collectively, when you see a strength coming from countries. So that's why I don't limit it from a China-US competition. It has to be seen from a broader multipolar world, whereby those who share these values work together to ensure peace, stability, and again, prosperity for people in this region, in the greater Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with Dindo. I would add that the internationalization of this question is important because it also counters the Chinese narrative that this is just the United States seeking to contain China. It's just the United States bullying China, when actually a collective group of countries in a coordinated way is able to message to say, no, actually, we all have see this in a different light, and we're all concerned about your behavior. Suddenly, that narrative that this is just the United States being unfair to China becomes more complicated. And I think it's also important, as Dindo said, to do this in a coordinated way to counter the Chinese preferred method of diplomacy, which is bilateral, to approach each country separately. We've seen that in the European Union, of course, as well. So by coordinating our policies, by having a common narrative and a message that counteracts that tactic of perhaps division as well.
So from your perspective, which country you feel most vulnerable? Which one seems better or worse prepared?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think inevitably countries close to Taiwan are going to be the most vulnerable here. And countries that have strong trading relations with China, as Dindo has said, are very vulnerable. Beyond that, countries that are less prepared, I think countries in this region, as Dindo has said, have lived with this for a long time and are obviously very concerned, but have an understanding of what they're doing. I think in Europe, this is quite new for us. So I would say that in Europe, we're probably at a low level of preparation for thinking about how we would respond to a Taiwan contingency, even thinking about what a Taiwan contingency might look like, how we would respond to a kinetic conflict versus how we would respond to gray zone crises across the Taiwan Strait. We're at the early stages in most capitals of thinking about that. We know that the United States is having conversations with various capitals across Europe to start thinking about it, to I think push forward that momentum. But this is early days yet.
For countries in the Indo-Pacific region, especially near Taiwan, I think Republic of Korea, Japan, the Philippines, this will affect us a lot. And from that perspective, the weakest there is the Philippines. That's why it's good to see really quite strong activities coming from countries willing to work with us. So I see their actions in the Philippines now as connected to Taiwan, that as they make themselves stronger in partnership with the Philippines, and always emphasizing that we all share values, we are here for rules-based order. It creates that collective effort. And imagine Canada being active now in our part of the world. Nobody believed me when I was saying that because I was being briefed by Canadian officials, but suddenly they're here with 4 ships right now in the region, or India, who views things differently, suddenly is now partnering with the Philippines and will announce stronger maritime cooperation by January next year. They even asked our institute to host the initial activity to announce their interest to play a major role here. So, and also I think maritime ASEAN countries are waking up to this reality, because they like to whisper to Philippines, "We are with you," but we cannot say this publicly. But now at least when you see those, when you experience that, you feel frustrated really with ASEAN. But Vietnam is more advanced compared to some. But you just hope that some of these ASEAN countries see value in this, because at the end of the day, it's a region that has been peaceful, stable, that has uplifted the lives of their people because of this free flow of trade, commerce. We want it to continue. And for that to continue, we need to collectively act. If not, we will have China reigning over us. As I speak of a multipolar world, there will be a unipolar world in our region. First island chain, second island chain. So that should be a concern among countries. But more so now with Japan, Korea, Philippines, I think will be.
Can I maybe just add that aside from countries, I think it's interesting to see, you mentioned commerce, and that sparked a point in my mind about the role of industry and how industry is waking up to a potential impact on trade and investment from a possible Taiwan conflict.
Sure.
And that's definitely been a sea change, I think, where now companies are increasingly thinking about their risk exposure, about their supply chains, how they might need to change, but also perhaps unhelpfully for Taiwan, whether or not Taiwan is a smart business investment opportunity anymore. So we've seen a number of companies, I think, question that. Companies now also who are present in Taiwan and China need to think about the security of their personnel. So this goes beyond just countries. It also impacts industries and different sectors within the private sector and industry.
Right. So maybe regional country in East Asia may have different perspective on this whole new issue development, and perhaps Europe has your own, and perhaps United States, even United States. Now they concerned about the so-called mutual vulnerability because of so-called the missile gap between the United States and China, and we don't know. We're not sure whether China will focus and keep their promises on no first use policy. There's a whole lot of debate out there. So I think as you mentioned earlier, I think year 2024, next year will be a decisive year that we all need to pay attention and work together towards the peace and stability. I do have a last question for both of you. So with a focus on allies of the United States, which security and economic measures appear meaningful and possible to prevent or mitigate an escalations? Are there any opportunity for future cooperations, perhaps?
I think if you're looking at maintaining the status quo in Taiwan Strait,
Sure.
What for us was a good news was when we saw the Camp David, Korea, Japan, the U.S. talking.
Sure.
They even mentioned South China Sea in that document. So those are strong statements. And in the Philippines, we have seen the past year how a lot of interest coming from India, Philippines, Australia, Japan even talking, U.S., Japan, Philippines having our own trilateral. So this kind of and at the core of all this, even at the AUKUS, Australia, UK, United States, this type of cooperation among these nations,
Sure.
I think will collectively deter any change of the status quo in Taiwan Straits, and it will, and even the actions economically by countries to de-risk themselves from China, gives countries in ASEAN that look, see. There are even economic opportunities as we all cooperate to ensure a rules-based order, because we benefit from these movements, and as we move and really look at Taiwan as possibility at the core of what we call future wars, technology, chips. We have to ensure that we protect not them for their economic role, and we also need to protect them because by keeping the status quo, because of it's a country that has decided that they are democratic, they choose their leaders, and they would not like any other system. Even though there's a China dream, even though it's a matter of nationalism for the Communist Party of China, that they need to finish the revolution by taking control of Taiwan. There are different views in this world, and those that believe on the democratic values, that you elect your leaders, you follow rules, is what should be dominant in the world today.
So in your view, perhaps it is also in the interest of China to maintain this status quo and continue to be part of this, liberal international order. And
I think so.
Yeah.
That's why it's really surprising why they've been aggressive in the region. What is driving that aggressiveness? We have seen them even becoming aggressive with their so-called wolf warriors during the pandemic, and look what happened. There's a lot of pushback. Before Trump made use of the Wuhan virus, Filipinos were calling it Wuhan virus because we said it was brought to the Philippines by tourists from Wuhan. That was our. So I think that they need to realize that they can be part of this order, and that was what we were. When I say we, the Filipino, when we filed the case, you were hoping that you have benefited from this order, China. That this order has created prosperity, so why alter it? Why change it? Because at the end of the day, we can all live peacefully, stable and prosperous by working together, respecting each other's interests, but globally working together to uplift the lives of our different nations' people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Did you want to?
Well, I completely agree. There needs to be a political, military angle to this, as Dundo said, but also an economic angle to this. You can't say that countries have to diversify away from China if there's no alternative. And so, how IPEF evolves by the United States, how trade relations with Taiwan evolve as well into the future. That's going to be incredibly important to ensure that prosperity in the region also doesn't suffer from this. At the end of the day, voters are voters in democratic countries, and they need to ensure that livelihoods are maintained. On the military front, completely agree that these unilateral, trilateral, bilateral groupings are incredibly effective and have allowed the United States to build on its relationships in the region in really practical and pragmatic ways that are important for deterrence. I would say that integration needs a little bit, perhaps more thinking, but I don't think that's impossible, and that's certainly, I think, the political will on the sides of all of these actors to work towards that. The last thing that I would say beyond the region, there's of course the US-NATO alliance, and here with European partners and allies, I think the United States and Europe probably need to think a little bit more, if they aren't already doing so, about a division of labor, about whether Europe or NATO need to start thinking about how they're going to be engaged in the Indo-Pacific region, or whether instead they take priority to secure European defense and security.
Sure.
I think that type of arrangement still needs to play out in diplomatic terms.
Okay, yeah. So, as you mentioned, this perhaps NATO's commitment to this part of the region is early stage, is not fully developed, but the cooperation needs to be there in the future. Yeah.
Well, I think for NATO, I think they've made it clear that they're never going to be a military actor in the Indo-Pacific, that they're not going to expand the NATO alliance beyond what it is. There are, of course, important actors and partners within the Indo-Pacific that NATO has relations with, for in particular Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. But certainly for NATO, there's an opportunity and a desire, I think, to use these partnerships to learn more, to coordinate politically more as well with each other. For NATO, I suppose the challenge is going to be at home first and foremost. And there is where that division of labor, I think, comes into play that I was talking about.
Okay, great. Yeah. Any final thought that you want to share?
Simply, we need to ensure within the region that rules-based international order is maintained for peace, stability, prosperity. We need to cooperate defense-wise, maritime-wise, to ensure that order to be maintained. And collectively, I think we can really deter any actions to change the status quo.
Sure.
So those minilaterals, trilaterals, we need to have really, I agree, integrated approach and ensure that within the Indo-Pacific, peace and stability will be maintained.
I would add, completely agree with Dindo, of course, but I would add a question about a point on economic deterrence and the role of sanctions potentially against China and whether or not that will be successful in deterring China. I think we need to think about that a little bit more. If we do assume that the impact of a Taiwan contingency is going to be extreme on the global economy, then does sanctions really play a useful, are sanctions really a useful tool to deter China if they've made a decision to commit to a reunification by force? I think we're in danger at the moment of equating what's happened in Ukraine sometimes with what's happened in, what might happen in Taiwan and taking away lessons that might not be applicable. So there I think we need to be a little bit more cautious and think through exactly what the impact of this will be, to work backwards to think about deterrence more clearly from a Beijing perspective as well, not just from what the United States thinks will deter China or Taiwan or Japan or the Philippines, but also to try to understand Beijing's calculations and perspectives better. Because of course, as we're doing as we're coordinating more and cooperating more in these various different ways that we've discussed today, China, of course, is also working very hard to sanction-proof itself, to diversify its own supply chains, to become more self-reliant, to expand its network of partnerships in the global south. So I don't think we've fully come to terms with what that means in the event of a Taiwan contingency or how to deter Beijing.
Okay. So thank you very much for sharing your thought frankly today. We all learned quite a bit from your expertise today, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.